Welcome to Minority Populations in Forensic Mental Health. This Q&A session is a recording of our discussion around Assessment 1, Case Study 1. My name's Elke Perniger and I'm your convener for this semester. So this session will be viewed by students across Australia, and therefore I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands throughout Australia. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of these lands and the elders who have passed and the elders present today. I'd also like to acknowledge the hardship suffered by the people across Australia and hope that any of the material within any of these sessions, course content or courses is sensitive to this. So in today's sessions, I'm going to go through the student questions that have been asked. I'm going to take you on a course tour and have a look at the requirements of the essays and also the course content. We'll have a look at the task and the marking criteria. Take you on a quick tour of the Griffith University Online Library catalogue, just to give you a quick reminder. So for those of you probably already realise and know how to use it, but for those of you who've come from different institutions or it's been a little while since you've studied, kind of a handy little tip to know. Then I'll come back and see if I've answered everyone's questions. So these are some of the questions asked by students in previous semesters, as well as some questions asked by students in this semester. Trimester, should I say. So what are some examples of the critical issues that may be related to this case study? How many critical issues are there within the case study that we must identify? What is the format supposed to be? Can you provide an example? How do we research for the assignment? Would headings be appropriate in the essay? Is the case study, should we refer to just Aboriginal people or both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? The introduction says Georgia has been arrested and says little about her status of arrest. Does this mean she's in detention and all of these things are taking place in prison? How many references should be included to receive the best possible mark? I don't currently work in the field and have no experience of the field as yet. Will it be possible to present a written piece demonstrating just my understanding of what the research shows in this area, and will this be enough? What types of factors should we be using? Broad, example, rural placement and discrimination, or more specific, so example, children having been taken away. What perspective is this being written from? And are the strategies for interview, treatment plan, management plan while she is in prison? Okay, so they're the questions being asked, so I hope to answer those as I take you on a course tour. So we're going to have a look at the assessment folder and the course content folder. Okay, so here we are on the course homepage, and which opens up automatically for you when you come to the course site. So what we're going to do, we're going to go down here to the left-hand navigation bar. We're going to go to the assessment folder first before we go to the course content folder. So let's have a look in here. Here's that reminder that I put in, so please don't forget, if you haven't already, having a look at the welcome video, which just helps familiarise you with the course site and what the requirements of the course are for you. Okay, so we're going to have, I'm going to go to the unit map and going to go to the link for case study 1 in the assessment column. Click on that. And here we have the information for case study 1. So it's worth 40% of your overall mark for the course, and it is a typical academic essay. So I do another course, it's an advanced version of this, in which I take you through the process of writing a risk assessment report. For the purpose of this case study 1, assessment 1 for this course, what you're doing is a typical academic essay where I'm seeing an introduction, where I have introductory statements around the core content or core focus of the essay. Within the introduction, you're telling me as the reader what you're going to cover in your essay. Then you have the core content of the essay, so the main body of the essay, and then it finalises with one or two concluding paragraphs which bring all the information together. So no new surprises in the conclusion, and all within 2,000 words. And there's a leeway there of 10% either way with the word count. And what you're asked to do is you're required to identify the critical issues in the case study provided below. That's down here. We'll have a look in a moment. That are indicative of those factors that specifically impact or disadvantage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in forensic mental health. So with the case study is actually for Georgia, and Georgia is an Aboriginal woman. She's not a Torres Strait Islander woman, and she's neither. And So what you'll find when you're looking at the literature, you'll see a lot of literature that refers to Aboriginal people of Australia, Indigenous people of Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Australia. And often what you'll find is they will group Torres Strait Islander people with Aboriginal people in the same literature and view both cultural groups as one whole group. So I know the limitations of the literature that is available. So one of the questions in that list was, do you want me to use Aboriginal people or as a term, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? When you're referring to just Aboriginal people, when you're referring to both groups together, or when you're referring to Torres Strait Islander people separately, use whatever label is relevant to what you're talking about. But I understand that even though we've got Georgia, who's an Aboriginal woman, there might be some literature that you will use to support your opinion around the social determinants of poor social emotional well-being that might group Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with Aboriginal people in the statistics and the literature and the factors that have been identified. So understand that and expect that. And yet using research literature, identify specific strategies suggested as effective in mitigating these factors and discuss the benefit of implementing them in the forensic mental health field. So what I'm asking you to do is have a look at Georgia's case study, identify those factors that sort of jump out at you for Georgia's case. What are the things that are most important? What are the things that we need to keep in mind that might be specific to those factors that disadvantage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in health, mental health and forensic mental health that you can see in Georgia's case that might make it different to working with a non-Indigenous client. Then using the literature, I'd like you to have a look. So take those factors that you've identified. Give me something on a sort of micro level, so something that's going to help Georgia. Give me something on a more strategic level, so kind of service level, and then something more broad, like a societal level. So strategies that we can use to address those factors you've identified as important. And the focus there is in forensic mental health. So that's often the factor that's forgotten when people do this essay. So that there can be lots of information about the factors that impact on people in health, that impact on people in mental health, but forget about the additional layer of the impact of forensic mental health to that population. And so with forensic mental health, we're thinking about people who have been diagnosed or have the potential to be diagnosed or have some question around their mental health that have come in contact with the criminal justice system. So not just prison, but the broader criminal justice system. Please don't hesitate in asking me any questions at all, or placing any questions up on the discussion board, or emailing me directly. I'm more than happy to answer any of them. Let's have a look at the case study itself. Okay, so here is the case study. So Georgia is a 23-year-old Aboriginal woman who has been arrested for the murder of her husband. She is from a remote community, speaks little English and left school in grade 8. She has been admitted on several occasions to the local hospital in the past for being a victim of domestic violence and a drug overdose. She was intoxicated at the time of the offence and believed her husband was trying to kill her with magic. Georgia has 3 children who have temporarily been placed in the care of her husband's relatives. Georgia has told the mental health worker that her husband is speaking to her and that they are going to get her. She will not elaborate on who she believes is after her. Georgia has a substance abuse problem dating back many years, and she has used various substances ranging from paint, petrol and glue to cannabis and alcohol, which she consumed in large quantities on a weekly basis. The community is divided by Georgia and her husband, is divided because Georgia and her husband belong to very dominant families in the community. There's been previous conflict between these families. The primary source of collateral information has been her husband's family, and Georgia is unwilling to provide information to the local health worker or legal aid officer because they are also relatives of her deceased husband. So when you're looking at this, some additional context linking to one of the questions asked by one of the students is, imagine that she has just been arrested. She's in the watch house. We're trying to get information from her to find out what's going on and assess her mental health at the moment and her well-being. So she hasn't yet been moved to remand, to prison, to court. So we're still thinking in her community. And so we've still got the local health worker, the local legal aid officer, who are relatives of her deceased husband there as well. Okay, and then take some time also to come here to the marking rubric. So here we have the marking criteria down the left-hand column of the marking rubric. And in your essay planning, what you're aiming for is a commendations column here. So with the first 3 criteria, really looking at the core content of the essay. Then the 4th criteria, saying, looking at, did you support your arguments and points and factors with sound research literature? So it's not just, if I was doing this essay, it's not just Elke's opinion. It's an opinion that's supported and based within the literature and other information, so other credible information. And the last 2 points around format. So some very easy marks there around referencing as well. So don't forget this essay needs to be referenced in APA referencing style. So don't forget that we have in the resources folder over here, we have a brief APA referencing guide, 2-pager guide that'll help you sort of remember how to reference. So do those in-text citations, so there's open bracket, author, year, with close bracket within the body of your essay, and how to set out the references in your reference list. So thinking about in your essay, if you're directly quoting someone else's work, I need to see quotation marks, open bracket, author, year, page number for that quote, or page numbers for that quote. Please don't represent other people's work as your own. So it's very important and something that's taken very seriously around academic integrity and plagiarism at the university. And also anything that you reference in the body of your text needs to be included in a reference list, which starts on a new page. So a new page for your reference list at the end of your essay with the header references. And then you set out your references like this according to the reference. So remembering that this is a brief APA referencing guide in the resources folder here in the left-hand column. Okay, let's go back to that assessment folder, scrolling down for unit map, case study 1, back to the marking rubric. Okay, so when you come to planning your essay, I would suggest completing the course content for this module first, before then coming to this marking rubric, opening up Georgia's case study, highlighting either on your screen in the PDF or if you print it out in hard copy, the key things that jump out at you as important based upon the knowledge and information that you already have and that you've gained from the course content folder. Then come here and plan out the framework for your essay, looking at this commendations column. So this is what you're aiming for to get the most marks. Then when you've finished your essay, you need to submit it down here to the final essay submission point. Your essay isn't considered submitted until it's submitted in the final essay submission point. No need for any cover pages, as Turnitin, which is a software program that we use, keeps track of names and you access it through here. So you submit it here, I mark it in this folder, and this is where you access my comments that are linked to the marking criteria as well. So what you'll see after I've marked the essay, you'll see throughout your essay comment boxes that link to each part. They'll be linked within your essay itself, and they'll link back to a marking rubric on the right hand side that looks like the marking rubric up here, so you know which cell each comment relates to. So Turnitin, the software program that we use, is also a text matching software program. So what we're looking for here is to tick off to say no, that this essay hasn't been copied or bought. and it is the work of the person submitting the essay. So that's really important too, particularly at postgraduate level. So you're using this as part of your profession or going out to work. It's really important to present your own work. Okay, so that's the assessment folder for case study 1. Let's have a look at the course content folder. So you're going to be looking at both Module 1 and Module 2. The main focus, of course, with Module 2. So please make sure that you come here and you've completed all the module work before you start looking at the factors in George's case, particularly the readings, the mini lectures and the advice from the field. Okay, so we've had some wonderful practitioners that volunteered their time to provide that advice from the field, some sort of mini tips and tricks to do with interviewing people in forensic mental health that happen to be Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. Yeah, so make sure you have a look at that information. So we look in the mini lectures, we look at the key social determinants of poor social and emotional wellbeing. Okay, so I've taken you through the assessment folder and the course content folder. I've showed you the APA referencing guide in the resources folder. And I've showed you where to submit your essay. So let's go back to the course folder. Actually, before I do that, what I'll do is I might just take you on a library tour. So you can access the library either through this link at the top right hand corner or by going to the main homepage of Griffith and typing in library into the search engine, or through your student page at Griffith. So I'm just going to go through here. Okay, this is a library page. I want to look beyond the normal catalogue. I want to have a look at the advanced search so that I can narrow down my search when I'm looking for the material to support my essay. So what you've got for your essay, you've got the material within the course content folder, and then you've done your plan, you've looked at the factors. Now you're going out further and looking at what other literature is available out there in order to support your essay. And for this essay, I'm looking for things outside of published material from journals and texts, looking at government policies, looking at what individual communities have identified, NGOs, so looking at credible information and literature out there that can support your opinions, and things that we can do to mitigate some of these factors and try and, I know it's a term that's often used and probably overused, but bridging that gap between the factors that we're seeing in George's case, the factors that are disadvantaging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in forensic mental health, and how we can bridge that gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in forensic mental health. Okay, so here I am in the library catalogue search, the advanced search. So what I'm going to start thinking about doing, I might start thinking about entering in some terms. I want Aboriginal, I want forensic mental health. I want to look at the years from 2010 onwards. I might start with an ebook, but I think in this area I might actually start with seeing what journals are out there. I want to look at journal articles where I can access the full text online. So you have access to by being a student through Griffith and OUA and accessing this course, you have access to so many different databases and literature out there just through this catalogue. So take advantage of it while you have access to it. Because often in the field, if you're not linked to an academic institution, then you don't have this wonderful luxury, and it can be a very expensive luxury to have. Okay, so I've plugged in some key terms, search terms, and now I'm going to go through this list and I'm going to decide what I want to put aside and have a look at a bit later for my essay. I'm having a look at, okay, so making visible and invisible Aboriginal forensic mental health. Well, that sounds really interesting. I'm going to click on this little button here. Save this item for later, and what it does, it saves a link up into this folder, so at the end of this scrolling through search I can have a look there as well. Improving forensic mental health care, challenges and opportunities, fantastic, I like that. Let's add that. And is that written by the same people? Volume 2, Issue 3, actually the same article, so I won't add that one. Disabling forensic mental health attention, no. Improving forensic mental health care to Indigenous Australians. Okay, that might sound interesting. I'll have a bit of a look at that. Look at that in more detail. No. Psychotropic medication, no. Challenges establishing adolescent, no. We're talking about adult. Brief history of forensic mental health service in Western Australia, no. Improving forensic mental health care in Indigenous Australian, that sounds like one of the earlier ones. I think that's one of the earlier ones. Yep, so it's a repeat. Pathways to Forensic Mental Health, Toronto. So being aware that when you go through this, what we're looking for is Australian Indigenous people in forensic mental health, because that's the topic we're looking at. So when you're looking through, you might see the term Indigenous, but it's actually referring to other countries. So it might be referring to First Nation people of Canada, Maori people of New Zealand. So being aware of where the article is and what population they're talking about, and whether or not you can use it to support your opinion in your essay. Okay, so just I've been through that big whole long list, and I've identified some interesting ones. I've looked at some previews here to work out a little bit more where the abstract is. Is that interesting? Is that not interesting? Will that be of use? And then I finish my search and I come up here, and what I might do is I might choose to email this list to myself to have a look at a bit later on, or what I might do is I might start opening them now and saving the PDFs. So just click on, all you have to do is click on Full Text Online, and then let's have a look, and you should have a little button there somewhere on the page. Each journal is different, where the PDF button is on the page, and you can click on it and download the full text article. Okay, so here we go. Oh, there's the PDF. There, you click on that to download the PDF, which you can save in a folder somewhere for your essay. There you go, and you can save. Okay, so going back, and you can do that for each. And so that's a basic tour of the library site. Okay, so we've had a look at the course content folder, assessment folder, resources folder, and had a library tour. So a reminder, it's 2,000 word essay, typical academic essay format, introduction, giving me some introductory statements about the core content or core focus of the essay, a little bit in the introduction about telling the reader, so myself or whoever marks the essay, what you're going to talk about in the essay. Then you've got the core body of the essay, and then you've got one or two paragraphs that kind of conclude the essay, which summarise the key points but don't provide any new information. With the word count, 10% either way. Complete essay that identifies the critical issues in the case study provided that are indicative of those factors that specifically impact on or disadvantage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in forensic mental health. So don't forget the forensic mental health component, and forensic mental health being more than prison. Identify specific strategies suggested as effective for mitigating these strategies. So what are you going to do with Georgia herself, and more broadly with the broader population in forensic mental health? Support choice with literature. So please don't forget to, it's not, if I was writing the essay, it's not Elke's opinion by itself, it's Elke's opinion, or Elke's opinion based on this literature, these findings by this community NGO that's provided this intervention and found this outcome, this government strategy that failed or worked or didn't work, this key research in this area that found this outcome which supports your opinion. So it's using that information to make your opinion credible. So imagine that you're presenting these strategies or this analysis to a broader group of professionals. How can you convince them that your opinion is correct? Okay, and yes, so discussing the benefit of implementing these strategies in the field of forensic mental health. we've had a look at the library tool. Okay, so let's have a look at those questions. So what are some examples of critical issues that may be related to this case study? So that's where you need to think about, we need to do the course content, so module 2, doing that module, reading those readings, listening to those mini lectures and having a look at the information provided by the field in those other videos will give you an indication of what critical factors you need to identify in George's case. So that's actually the primary purpose of the essay, so I can't give you the answers for that. How many critical issues as well, so that's kind of like long as a piece of string, but what you'll do is identify, all I'm after is people to identify the main critical issues. If you identify additional ones, that's great, but it's not necessary. What is the format supposed to be? So academic essay, introduction, body, conclusion, third person, and so it's not being, you don't have to write it as if it's a report or any type of professional writing. It's more academic writing. How do we research for this assignment? So I took you on the library tour. So it's about doing the course content. Once you've done that, pulling up George's case study, highlighting the components, framing your essay according to the marking criteria, going to the library and supporting your opinion with what you've found, either published through those catalogues, those databases, or published through government sites, community sites, NGOs. Would headings be appropriate? I prefer people not to use headings. I find that people use headings when they can't get paragraphs to flow. In the case study, should we refer to just Aboriginal people or both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? So as I mentioned before, Georgia is an Aboriginal woman and not a Torres Strait Islander woman, but you'll find with the literature, and I understand that way some of the literature is framed, is they group Torres Strait Islander people in with Aboriginal people when they talk about stats and support and strategies. The introduction says Georgia has been arrested and says little about the status of her arrest. Does this mean she's in detention and all things take place in a prison? No, consider she's still back in her community in the watch house. It's really early days. She's just been arrested. How many references should we include to receive the best possible mark? I don't mark on people's references. I mark on the quality of the essay. I would be very surprised to see only something like 3 references, considering you have to identify not only the factors but also the strategies. I wouldn't expect to see over 20 because I think that's sort of heading out into a bigger piece of work. It's really just making sure that the factors you identify and the strategies you identify in your essay are supported by other people's work. So it's not just your opinion by itself. I don't currently work in the field and have no experience in the field as yet. Will it be possible to present a written piece demonstrating just my understanding of what the research shows in this area? And will this be enough? Absolutely, because that's what this course is aimed at. It's aimed at people that don't have experience in this area. Yeah, so absolutely. That's why doing the course content first and doing your other readings first before you start actually writing your essay. What types of factors should we be using? So broad or specific. So you're going to start out with some of the micro stuff around identifying those factors key to George's case. But those things that might be different that you might see in an Indigenous client versus a non-Indigenous client, and also additional factors to consider because of the nature of her cultural experience and cultural background. But then you're going to look at how those factors that you see in George's case that you've also identified in the broader literature for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in health, mental health and forensic mental health. What perspective is this written from? So once again, it's an academic essay and not a report. Other strategies for interview, treatment plan or management plan, there too. So some specific strategies about how you might address some of those issues or factors identified on a micro level for Georgia, but then some of those system issues, some of the societal issues, some of those broader strategic issues. So kind of taking it out more broadly. And I don't expect you to get it right, just support your opinion with the literature. So while I can't provide answers about what are the critical issues in George's case, what I can do is give you this example, and we'll talk through this example as a way of kind of mirroring what you might do in the case of Georgia. So what we have here is we've got a case example of John, who is a 38-year-old Aboriginal man from far north Queensland, who's currently incarcerated for stealing, common assault, and drugs possession in Brisbane. He has a long history of general offences, however this is his first term of imprisonment. He has no history of violence prior to his current incarceration. Upon entry into the prison, John became aggressive and verbally abusive. He wouldn't engage and refused to obey direct orders. Initially it was unclear whether or not he was able to comprehend the directions or was aware of where he was. He presented as confused and somewhat disorientated. After his first night in prison to now, he has been housed in the Centre Detention Unit. So a detention unit typically in a prison is like a solitary confinement area. On his first night in prison, his behaviour and shouting caused such a disturbance within the 50-man unit. So typically within high secure or maximum security prisons, you have areas within the prison that are more, more highly controlled, and those that are lower security and lower controlled. And those high security areas tend to have big units with 50 or more people in them. What it is, it's like a big open area that has individual cells of different levels within that area. And this is an example of the first unit he went into, in which he was in his own individual cell, but it's a cell within a group of cells of 50 people within that one unit. And during the night, his shouting and behaviour caused such a disturbance with the other people in the unit. For his own safety, he's been removed to the detention unit or solitary confinement. And that's where he's been since his incarceration. Staff and inmates report that he continuously shouts threats and screams obscenities that are sexually explicit in nature, the content of which often referred to his sister, who was at another correctional centre, being raped by staff, and that he could see this happening. Staff report that this has been near continuous over his first week in detention, with him only stopping when he becomes exhausted or when he received a visit from the elders. The visit calmed him for a while. The elders' visit calmed him for a while, but only temporarily. John was then seen by an Indigenous clinician. At interview, John represented as calm, but difficult to engage, no eye contact and monosyllabic. So one-word answers. John denied the behaviour reported by staff, stating that they were exaggerating and that he had just wanted to be returned to his unit, the usual prison accommodation section of that 50-man unit. The clinician could identify no major issues with affect, perception or thought process. John has had no contact with mental health services prior to this, either in the community or in custody. Upon leaving the detention unit, however, the clinician became locked between doors. So often when you move around a prison, they have airlock doors, so you might have, it's kind of like two doors leaving each area. So you go through one and you're locked in there, and then the next one opens. And sometimes the pause between can be quite a bit. So the clinician's moved out of line of sight of John. John believes the clinician has left the detention unit. But while the clinician is still within earshot, starts hearing John screaming. So the screaming began again. Collateral information shows that 3 out of John's 5 siblings and his mother had all been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Also that his mother in particular had spent quite a number of years institutionalised as a young woman because of this. So in the same way with John's cases with Georgia, what you're doing is you're sitting down and working out what things are jumping out at you as key factors that we need to consider that might disadvantage John. Okay, and based upon his experience, that we can identify as common factors that Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people experience within mental health or forensic mental health. So here are some quick points that spring to mind. So we've got John and we've got isolation from community. So he's from up north and he's been brought down to be accommodated in Brisbane. So he's away from his area, away from his community. So if someone wanted to visit, they'd have to come down to Brisbane, but he's also away from his community, his connection and his land, language. So what is John's first language, second language, third language? So when he first came in, people weren't sure whether or not he could actually understand the directions. So this is possible. Maybe he didn't understand where he was. experience of institutions. So it's not necessarily people's direct experience of institutions. So we've got John's mother who has a long history of institutions. So think about psychiatric units 20, 30 years ago. Think about people's experience, so Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's experience of institutions and governments. So thinking back to the modern history in the mini lectures. And some of the fears that will naturally be associated there for John. Think about John's family history of schizophrenia. Okay, so we've got components there about working around what is his views, his perceptions. Are there cultural aspects to this? Is there a pure mental health base to this? How are we going to find out what is what? Okay, we need the professional, someone with a professional background that has a cultural understanding to come and see and talk to John. His first experience, this is his first experience of incarceration, and also potentially removed him from his coping strategies. It's not just positive coping strategies we might have removed him from, but it might have been some of those negative coping strategies. So if we think about the prison population, we have a high proportion of substance misuse amongst that population. So you've got a population who use substances as a way of coping and self-medicating and with the addictions out in community, and now we've removed that coping. So we've got this vacuum there that we have to work with. Protective factors. So the strengths are often the big thing that are forgotten when working with people in forensic mental health. So it's about identifying what strengths we have to work with, what positives in his support network do we have to work with. Not just the stressors and the worries and the risk factors. And then also the broader issue of overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in prison. And so with John, there's an Aboriginal man. There's an example of overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in prison. What can we do? Okay, so looking there at providing access to culturally appropriate mental health services. So looking for services that John can identify with, that John feels welcomed by, gaining that therapeutic alliance and engagement with, that can provide a culturally safe service to him in prison, reducing the impact of isolation through social and emotional wellbeing supports, working together as a practice team. So having the Indigenous clinician, the elders, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the nurses, social workers, transition officers, program officers, working together as a team to work out what are John's needs, what are his strengths, and what can we do to support him and improve his quality of life while he's in here. A willingness to engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and practices. So this is a very important factor. So depending upon the institution, the service, the practice you work within, and the opinion of the broad majority with that service, will determine how much of a challenge it is to get people to engage and honour people's knowledge and experience and understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, and how this can better inform and improve your practice when working with Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander clients. Okay, so if you have any other questions at all, please don't hesitate in placing them up on the student questions thread, which you can find in the student chat forum, on the course discussion board, or by emailing me directly. And there's my email address. So if you have the question, at least another 10 students have the same question but might not feel as comfortable in asking. So if you ask them, you're doing them a favour, you're doing me a favour, and we can all share in the question and the answer. So thank you very much for listening.